After 6 seasons and 86 episodes of watching the life of the New Jersey mob boss in The Sopranos, could any of us have predicted that ending? Amid the bittersweet mood of having been victorious in a mob war against a shape-shifting Persian monarch, but also, surely, being resigned to spending the rest of his life behind bars at the very least, Tony Soprano sits at Holston's, awaiting his family's arrival against the backdrop of Journey's Don't Stop Believing. Carmela arrives, then AJ. They engage in small talk and start munching on some onion rings while Meadow repeatedly tries to park her car. She rushes to the diner. Tony looks up, we cut to black, and collectively, an entire community questioned whether something was up with their TV. The Fade to Black is one of the most infamous and controversial TV show endings of all time, but you can't deny it took balls. If for nothing else, the fact that we're still sitting here talking about it almost 20 years later. Once considered a terrible ending to a masterful show, there's no stigmata these days. As time went on and the ending's impact was allowed to sink in, more and more people began to appreciate the genius conclusion to the show it actually is. Personally, I never really thought the main takeaway from the ending, the big question, was whether Tony was whacked or not. Sopranos fans often fall into two ardent groups. Either he did or he didn't, and for me, I didn't even initially realise there was doubt that he died. All the clues were there. From Bobby Bacalao's line, you probably don't even hear it when it happens, which is later demonstrated when the hairdo is killed in front of Silvio, who doesn't hear it. Patsy saying it won't be cinematic. The two black guys at the diner. Eugene wearing a members only jacket in the season opener and walking into a diner and shooting a man whose initials were AS. The members only guy in the final episode going to the toilet, a la the classic scene from The Godfather. Him being at a 3 o'clock angle to Tony. And of course, Chris warned him about 3 o'clock. Perhaps a video for another day, but 3 pops up a few times in this episode. 3 pictures behind Tony, 3 Boy Scouts, 3 onion rings, Meadows' 3 parking attempts, 3 rings of the door as people walk in, 3 creams on the coffee for the man in the cap. Earlier, bright light was used to showcase Tony waking up from a coma dream, regaining consciousness, so it's sensible to suggest a cut to black would be him losing consciousness. Tony, Carmela and AJ eat their onion rings whole, like communion wafers, as this is their last supper. There's just too much evidence. A more interesting question for me was always, who killed Tony? And in order to tackle this question, we ran down some of the suspects in a previous video. Ultimately, one of the key points of the ending is that it doesn't matter whether Tony died or not. He's finished. Whether he was whacked there and then, whether he got sent to the can for 20 years, not a peep, whatever. His life is a debacle. He's lost his soul, his humanity, his last opportunity being his rehabilitation with Dr. Milfy, who has now thrown him out. But in terms of a tangible storyline to decipher the ending, I fall into the camp that the best theory is that a combination of Butch, Paulie and Patsy conspired to take Tony out, as we discussed in another video. There are other theories about the ending, like the idea that Tony actually had an onion ring induced heart attack, which we've tackled. And today I wanted to look at another. One I initially dismissed as far-fetched, but having looked at the evidence, I can't deny it has legs. And that is that the entire episode of Made in America is a dream, and variations of this theory. The general idea being that when Tony went to sleep in the Blue Comet, he actually died in his sleep, and the final episode is something of a death-rattled dream while he is breathing his last. Maybe even another coma dream after he is taken to hospital again, or even purgatory, my friend. I know what you're thinking. Again with the ending scenarios? Yeah, again with the ending scenarios. So either name a better video idea or get the fuck over it. I'm not really a fan of "it was all a dream" theories. But if there's one show where dreams are important, it's this one. It's very allegorical. The show actively wants us to decipher dreams that Tony has. It's a wild theory, belonging in the same group as, say, Chrissy being a rat in his final episode, or Gino framing Vito with the security guard. But let's examine it. I'm not going to talk too much about the test dream from season 5 because that deserves its own video, and the dreams of the show is something we haven't yet tackled on the channel. But there are interesting things to note there too. Tony sitting in a restaurant, saying something bad is going to happen, reaching for the gun behind the toilet. I kind of like the idea that the test dream is called the test dream because Chase was testing out the dream idea he had for the series finale, however unlikely that is. There's a lot of lines in the final episode that could be the showrunners wanting to put the idea to us that this is all a dream. AJ saying, "You're living in a dream." The movie Dreamgirls being talked about. The crew watches The Twilight Zone in the safe house. The lyrics, "All that you dream" by Little Feat being heard when Tony walks into the diner. A key thing to note is that Made in America, which is initialized as MIA and is an anagram for I am a nice dream, is a really weird episode. There's strange editing and narrative choices. Dreamlike, if you will. Now, we can chalk this up to the fact that the episode is only one of two that Sopranos creator David Chase directed himself. You ever think he's a little weird about editing? He might be, but it's the final episode to one of the biggest shows of all time. Every cut, every edit would have been meticulously planned. I really found the lack of establishing shots in the episode threw me. Sometimes it jumps from mid-scene to mid-scene with little effort to establish the setting. The deal scene with Butch is full of weird jump cuts with nothing to establish that time has passed. It just makes the dialogue sound disjointed, like all of a sudden Butch is saying, "We started it?" And it's accompanied by background noises that start and stop suddenly. The weather is inconsistent. There are weird changes from day to night, like the episode opening with Tony waking up in the daytime, and the next scene is set at night, and then the next scene is set during the day. Why even show him waking up then? Well, it's worth mentioning, the test dream and the join the club dreams also start with him waking up. AJ's therapist is similar to Melfi in the way she looks and sits, and even Tony starts unloading his own problems on her. Carmela is noticeably irritated, as she often was when she did therapy with Tony. But what Tony says about his mother never showing him love and his inability to please her could be argued is the entire foundation of the show. Tony finally letting it out. And the reason he's letting it out, saying what he really feels, is because this is not real, it's just a dream. A bit like a similar scene where he revealed his true feelings about Christopher's death to Melfi, which of course happened in a dream. The weirdness of this episode feels quite Twin Peaks, a show which Chase does cite as an influence on The Sopranos. The episode is also full of wish fulfillment. His kids, for the most part, look like they're going to have good, fulfilling lives. Meadow is going to marry a good man and gets a job with an amazing salary. AJ accepts the new job with little fuss and seems pretty stable considering only an episode previous he was discharged from a mental facility. Janice is miserable. His nemesis Junior is rotting in a medical facility. The family can move back into the house. Agent Harris is not just on first name terms but actively supporting Tony and helping him in the war, calling him a friend and declaring, "We're gonna win this thing." Tony gains an unlikely victory over a much stronger family after Butch decides to suddenly betray Uncle Philly and the Shah goes out in a goofy, embarrassing way. How did Tony even know to reach out to Butch, that the little guy was unhappy and eyeing an end to the war? He knew because the exchange between Phil and Butch is taking place in Tony's dream. Why would a mob boss take his family out to a public dinner after a war just ended, with Shah loyalists potentially crawling around, if this was indeed real life? Even in the final scene, they look like a big, happy family, AJ reminding him of something he said in season 1, "Remember the good times." It's all a bit too perfect. Tony jumps from scene to scene with different characters. Janice, Junior, it's like he's doing the rounds, final goodbyes, a will and testament sort of thing with closure for all his relationships with different characters. He makes sure Bobby's kids are taken care of. His own kids are moving on with their lives. He doesn't really do anything morally wrong, does he, in the final episode? A bit like any of us would be like in a dream, where we're never the ones to do anything wrong, we're never the bad guys. He's even patriotically helping the FBI. And the way in which many of the scenes are filmed are bizarre. An intentional homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey. Tony walks in, stares at something, and then in the next shot he will be there or walking towards his destination, the thing that he was looking at, as if a few frames of film are missing. This happens when he meets Janice, when he meets Junior, and of course the final scene where it's more apparent. It's almost like he's walked in and is watching himself, as you might do in a dream. It's peculiar and it's creepy. Simultaneously, the episode has a haunting atmosphere, a muted tint in the colour, as Tony's last thoughts before he went to sleep, staring at that door with his gun, was about impending doom, betrayal, doubt, nihilism, anxiety. And this is felt all over the finale. His talk with the lawyer, for example, and most amplified in the final scene. Symbols of Tony's life and impending death are in the final scene. The guy with the Boy Scouts, reminiscent of Tony's youth where he yearned to have the makings of a varsity athlete. The guy in the cap kinda looks like Davy. A woman that walks in looks like Janice. The members-only guy looks a bit like his father, as if to say it was Johnny Boy's decision to bring Tony into the life which killed him. If of course you feel that the members-only guy is the guy who took Tony out in the end. The happy couple who remind us of Chrissy and Aid. The two black guys, eating onions which were supposed to be dangerous for Tony. It's all there, to quote David Chase. And it snowballs as Tony's subconscious recognizes he is coming to the end of his life, climaxing with the cut to black which signals the end of Tony's consciousness. There are several instances in the episode which could be Tony's consciousness dealing with things happening in real life that he is partially aware of. We've seen this before, in Tony's coma dream, when he hears Meadows' voice, or he interprets the doctor's torch as a helicopter light. And if we go back to the final episode, him looking uneasily at the door in the final scene is how he fell asleep in the previous episode, looking uneasily at the door. Tony's scene with Mink has an unease about it, an awkwardness with him thumping the ketchup bottle repeatedly, leading Tony to grab it. Could this actually be someone attempting CPR on Tony in real life? If you look at the ending episode through this lens, there's numerous possibilities. For example, perhaps for the final scene, Tony is in a vegetable state in hospital, no chance of recovery, dying as Carmela and AJ sit by his side, waiting for Meadow, his guardian angel who has saved him repeatedly throughout the show, like with the lamp, to arrive and say her goodbye. Perhaps this explains the whole waiting for Meadow in the final scene, but she was too late. She did not make it to wake him up like she did with the coma dream. Maybe the members-only guy is part of the hospital staff, walking around Tony's bed to prepare to pull his plug. When Tony visits Junior, birds are chirping, and Tony, annoyed, says, "Enough with the birds," and they stop chirping. That's really weird. Maybe there was bleeping of medical equipment making noises which annoyed Tony, so his subconscious blocked it out. It's mentioned that it reeks of piss at the seaside home and Carmela's spec house has a yellow colour. Is Tony urinating in his bed here? When he visits Sylvia in the hospital, is this Tony becoming vaguely aware of the machines that he is on in hospital? Speaking of which, the TV is playing Little Miss Sunshine and the screaming could be what Meadow or Carmela or even that streak of piss AJ are doing as Tony battles for his life. There's football players on the wall in the final scene, a subconscious reminder of Tony's lack of varsity ability. A tiger too, tigers being large cats, a big pussy if you will, a man who always remained on Tony's mind after his death. There's a house on the wall that is very similar to the one from his dream in Mayhem, which many take to symbolize death or hell, had Tony walked into the house. And here it is again, all the elements of his past swimming around in his subconscious in the final scene. In the ending of The Blue Comment, Tony goes to bed in his jacket, with the bed not having blankets, but when he wakes up he is wearing different clothes and the bed does have blankets. Of course, you might say that the opening of Made in America is set sometime later, which is suggested by a line where Tony says he hasn't eaten a green vegetable in over a week. But if one episode ends with the character going to sleep and the next episode opens with him waking up, we got a right to make that connection. We got a right to a lot of things right now. Tony's position when waking up looks like he's in a coffin. There's music being played that sounds like funeral organ music. The fact that the same song, You Keep Me Hanging On, is played multiple times in this episode, like when Tony wakes up, when he and his guard are driving to the spec house, and then again during Phil's death, is surely not a coincidence. That's pretty weird, and gives the episode a kind of existential feel, indicative of the disjointed continuity we have in dreams. Maybe this song is being played by Tony's bedside as he lays in the hospital. There's also the cat, which many consider to be Adriana reincarnated, staring at the photo of Chris. But what if it's actually Tony's subconscious representation of Chrissy, or what he wanted Chrissy to be? He's a good guy, Tony says of it, which is a weird way to talk about a cat. Paulie hates the cat and is constantly berating it, but the final shot of him has the cat walk in, like the two have a weird antagonism that has affection to it, much like Paulie's relationship with Christopher. Tony also says the cat kills mice for them, which is a subordinate behaviour that he wanted from Chris, an underling who would only do what he's told, but in reality, Chris would often be immature and fly off the handle. I spent so long talking about the dream theory that we don't really have much time to discuss the purgatory thing. Perhaps we'll do a deep dive in a future video, but the two theories are linked through their evidences. Only the purgatory thing suggests that Tony isn't dying, he's already dead. And much like how Chris, after he gets shot and says he went to the other side, says that purgatory involves repetition of punishment, perhaps this is Tony's punishment. Having to go through seeing his daughter's face, his guardian angel, the person he loves the most in the world, be seconds too late, as his own face is split apart by a bullet, again and again and again, after getting everything he wanted in that final episode. And so it goes on, this thing of ours. He walks into the diner like a man who's exhausted, bored even, of having to relive this again and again. Maybe the purgatory is the entire show, not just the finale, in that Tony is forced to repeatedly re-watch the entire show to see all the times he was selfish, how he hurt others, opportunities he had to change and to become a better man. But that's a topic for another day. Of course, you could counter the dream theory by saying, in spite of how weird the final episode is that the episode is far too logical and coherent to be a dream. But I don't think that's necessarily true. Previous Tony dreams had passages of normality, the coma dream especially, and he even hallucinated an entire person in Isabella in season 1. One major flaw with this theory though is that Paulie tells Tony about what he saw in the Bing, which is something he saw in a different episode. That's an issue. Though I guess we could say that Paulie told Tony off screen earlier, and this scene is a reenactment of sorts that's happening in Tony's head. So what do you make of the dream ending theory? Let me know in the comments section below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.